Good day, class, and welcome back to biology with Mr. Moriarty and our lovely assistants back here, which won't be doing anything today. Today, we're going to go a little bit further into diffusion and osmosis. So as we talk about diffusion, zoomed up video right there. Really, I just wanted to demonstrate it for you. So we'll take some gator colors, green and blue. Green and blue. I'm backwards on my screen. That's crazy. And we're just going to show diffusion on this water really quick. So here we have a water jug. Actually, it's a beaker, very nice big beaker. You guys will be using these when you get back. And right now, all that's really in there is water. Now, if I add some of this green dye, where I drop the dye will be very high concentration, and the rest of the water has no green dye on it, so it has really low concentration. And because of diffusion with no energy, anything else, eventually this water bottle will turn completely green. And it's just kind of fun to watch. And so we'll just start with a little bit of diffusion. Now what if I put on the other side the blue? Which way will it diffuse from areas of high to areas of low? And now we got a gator water bottle. And I don't know, diffusion is just fun to watch with food coloring and water. Will the blue and green mix? Should, because one is high and one is low. We'll just get black. So, very simple term, diffusion. Molecules move from a high concentration to a low concentration. Here we can see the molecules because they're colored in food coloring. And we'll come back to this because also with diffusion, if things reach equilibrium, so there's the same amount of green and blue in all areas of that cup, then it really should stop diffusing. And we just get a state called equilibrium. We'll come back to that. We'll look at it here at the end of our lecture. You can keep an eye on it there. Okay, welcome back after our demonstration. And if you look at our demonstration now, it has completely reached equilibrium. Nothing is still moving there. Actually, kind of cool if I put a little more food coloring in there, we can make a higher concentration. Maybe we can watch a little bit more in the screen. Oh, yeah, that stuff's cool. I just love food coloring. I just love science, for that matter. Okay, that's awesome. Let's get back to diffusion and osmosis. I know I had you guys write these down already, but we're going to write these notes down one more time just to make sure. Diffusion and osmosis are such important processes that occur in life, in your body, pretty much in everything. It kind of helps life run. It's one of those universal things that's just super important. So I want to make sure you all have a good grasp on this concept. So diffusion is the movement of molecules from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. So higher concentration, where my little cursor is now, to areas of lower concentration over here. Okay. Once these are both equal, like has pretty much occurred in our thing, in the beaker, then movement stops. Molecules still move, but the concentrations are equal. They're not going to try to go to one side of the beaker or the other side, or inside of the cell or outside of the cell. They'll just kind of maybe trade places, but they'll stay equal. So that is diffusion. Places this comes in really handy in your body is when you breathe. So for example, that's not really working. When you breathe into your lungs, take a big breath in, and well, let's go back to our, these guys are going to come in handy. If you guys look on the screen down below, here is my guy's lung, okay, and you're going to breathe through this, your trachea. That trachea is going to move down, and oh my gosh, it's falling apart on me. It's a rough day. I got things all around. But on our lung, you have these things called bronchial tubes. We're going to study those later. and they fill into these little sacs called alveoli, and that's where gas exchange, that's where oxygen comes into our body. And if you remember right from our plasma membrane, oxygen can move freely in and out of the cell. So at the bottom of my lung, you have, your lung comes into these little sacs called alveoli. And then around the sac out here is like your blood. So when you breathe in air, you breathe in a lot of oxygen. So let's say these little dots are all oxygen. Okay. So these little dots are oxygen. When I breathe in, I have a really high concentration of oxygen inside my alveoli, and remember, they're going to move to low. So in my blood, we just used all this oxygen for energy. Remember, we depict it as blue blood. That's kind of a lie. It's actually red. But it just doesn't have very much oxygen in it. So maybe it's got, a little leftover oxygen that didn't get used. But this is my high concentration, right? I'm going to put it H, and low out in my blood. So when I breathe in that oxygen, I have a really high concentration inside this little sac and low concentration here, and that's going to force a lot of diffusion, and the oxygen is going to travel into the blood. And that's really good because now I have oxygen in my blood. Now the same thing's going to happen when that oxygen gets to your cell. It's going to have, this blood gets to your cell, it's going to have high concentration of oxygen, and it's going to move to the low concentration inside my cell and help me out. So just a couple more drawings to help with this, just some practice. If this is a cell, and let's keep to oxygen because it moves freely in and out of the cell, maybe at my cell it's got a little bit of oxygen, okay, just a couple things. But then in my blood around the cell, there is a lot of little dots. I hope you guys can see these. I don't have the best drawing mechanisms here. There's lots of oxygen in my blood, so where does it go? It goes from high to low. On the other side of this, what if we had carbon dioxide, so the other way? So I'm going to just draw CO2. Once your cell uses oxygen, it makes a lot of CO2. Well, CO2 is dangerous to the cell. Okay, so carbon dioxide, we got lots of that inside the cell. And is there any out in our blood now? Nope. So which way would the CO2 move? From high to low, and it would leave our cell. So this is kind of an example of how diffusion works inside your cells to help life live. It's just this exchange of carbon dioxide, a poison, for oxygen, which is good. So in this case, now this CO2 would be back out in this blood, and it would actually be in the blood that's here, CO2. Remember, this is my lung. And when those CO2 concentrations are high in my blood, well, the air doesn't really have much CO2 in it. I mean, it has hardly any CO2 in it. It's going to diffuse in here. Okay, so going from high CO2 to low CO2, and then it's going to be breathed out, and then we bring in new oxygen, and that is just a good example of diffusion. So pretty awesome. That is diffusion. Next, we talk about osmosis. Okay, so osmosis now is going to be a very special term, and it's just a little bit different. So if you guys remember, the cell membrane is permeable to some things. So some things like water and oxygen and carbon dioxide can just freely flow between the cell. Like water can go between these two cells, no problem. But some things like salt or sugar cannot. So these things might be dissolved in the water, but they can't move between the two. So in this case, these molecules over here, high concentration, these salts, really want to get over here to this low concentration, but they can't. And so nature doesn't like that. It doesn't like having a high concentration of salt here and a low concentration here. But now nature looks at it more than like how many molecules they are, as how many molecules per water there are. So if I could move a bunch of water over on this side, this water becomes more salty. And as water moves into this, it becomes less salty. So by moving water, we can try to balance out how salty the water is. Okay, so osmosis is a little bit more confusing and hard to understand. It's a special term given to the diffusion of water. So sometimes the molecules that should diffuse can't pass through the membrane. And when this happens, the water will try to make concentrations equal by moving in or out. So the water tries to move in or out. And so we get this really cool thing called osmosis. Plus, it's just fun to say. And there was a cool movie when I was a kid called Osmosis Jones. So in the area below, or in any case, the water moves from the area of lowest concentration to the area of highest concentration. So this is opposite of the way the molecules move. Remember, molecules go from high to low. In water, the water will move from the high concentration of molecules to the low concentration of molecules. Not water molecules, salt molecules. Okay. And so when we talk about osmosis, we end up with three terms. Okay. We're going to have something called a hypertonic solution, isotonic, and hypotonic. So I'm going to draw these out, and this will be the end of our lecture. Hypertonic, so hyper means extra. Like when you're really hyper, you have more, okay? So hyper is extra, and in this case, we'd have a lot of salt concentration inside the cell. So this would be a very salty cell, kind of upset, not doing well, salty, okay? So I'm going to draw these little dots, but I think better than dots, I'm going to say maybe this is 10% salt. Because remember, this is water, so this is 10% salt water. Okay. And then the water outside of it, we'll say there's water out here, is maybe 3%. Okay, so that's 10%, 3%. Which one has more salt? 10%, right? So this would maybe just be a couple little dots around here. And in this case, what's going to happen is the water is going to move. So I'm going to draw H2O here to show that that's what's moving. The water is going to move from the low salt water concentration to the high salt water concentration. So water is going to leave this and go into here. Okay, so the cell is going to swell with water. So in a hypertonic solution, the cell swells with water. And so what would actually happen to the size of the cell is this cell might get really, really big. So maybe it went from that it's going to get way, way bigger because it's going to swell with water, maybe to the point it pops, but it's going to fill up with water. Fresh water is going to rush in here. And then what happens is it's trying to reach isotonic. So as water moves in here, I want you to picture that it turns into this cell. So now what happens is if this were to balance out, we have 13% total salt water here. If it were to balance out, it would be like 6%. Okay, it would go until it got to this, where now this is 6.5% salt water. And we also have 6.5% out here. Okay. At this point, they're equal. There is no movement of water. But if we started here at the hypertonic solution, so if we start here at the hypertonic solution right here, we've now moved all this water. As water left here, you get less water, which means my percent of salt water is going to go up, right? And as the water moves in here, this percent's going to go down, right? So like if I pour water into salty water, it's going to taste less salty. It's going to become less salty. But if I take water out of salty water, it's going to become more salty. So we're making it more salty here, less salty here, and the water is rushing in. In this case, we've now reached equilibrium. This is called isotonic. Everything's normal. Water is not going to be going in and out at any certain rate. Doesn't change. Our last one is hypotonic. So this is going to be the opposite. So this is exactly what happens if I try to drink salt water. As most of us know, drinking salt water is not a good way to hydrate my body, even though I'm putting a lot of water in there, because it's really salty on the outside. So in this case, let's say there's like 4% water in here. And I'm not going to draw water anymore because I think you guys get what we're doing. And maybe 10% out here. Now, which way does the water want to go? Okay, it's going to move from low to high. Okay, so until it balances out. But what's going to happen there is I'm going to take all the water away from my cell, and all my water is going to go into here. So I'm drinking salt water, but instead of putting more water in my body, I'm actually drawing water out. And if you think about this cell, if I'm taking water out of it, it's going to go from this nice pretty cell like this to down here is my like shriveled up little, just the cell's going to shrivel up and die of water. You guys are going to do a lab on this tomorrow. And this side, as water rushed in, this cell became like, it was this big, it would grow to like this big because it swelled with so much water. So that is osmosis. Hopefully that helped you guys with it a little bit. I always like to finish thinking of osmosis and tell you a story of a time I was really going to make my wife happy and make her lobster. So I went to the Pacific Ocean market, picked up a nice big lobster, like a 2-pounder. Oh, it's going to be delicious. And before I get going on this, where do lobsters come from? They come from the ocean, and the ocean has really salty water. But I was like, dude, I want to keep this lobster alive until my wife gets home for our special dinner. So I filled up the bathtub and threw it in fresh water. Because, you know, that's what my water is. It's fresh water. So I threw it in the bathtub, and I'm all excited because I'm going to have this live lobster. Well, sadly, I came to eat the lobster later, and it was kind of gooing and oozing guts out of it. It was dead, and it kind of popped, and there was like fluid releasing from it. And the reason is because I wasn't paying attention to my osmosis. And what happened is, because he was really salty, because my lobster was really salty water here, all the water from the tub rushed into the lobster. And as we saw on my previous screen, when that happens, what happens to the size of the cell? It gets really, really big. Well, when the cell gets too big, it pops. And so I killed the lobster by popping all its cells. And so not really exploded, but the guts kind of exploded out of the lobster. In any case, that's why you should know science so you don't look like an idiot. Don't forget to take your lecture quizzes, finish up any work you have, and then you guys will have a fun